Recall that conditional statements are used to run pieces of code based on whether the condition is either true or false. Okay, let me demonstrate this now with a simple example using a variable and an if-else statement. Additionally, we'll learn how to deal with cases where we have multiple if-else-if conditions. For example, the if-else statement can be used when you want to execute code based on a certain condition being either true or false. But what if you have 5 conditions or even 10? Well, you could use multiple lines of else if. There is another way to do this, using something called a switch statement. Okay, let me demonstrate this now with an example of when to use else if and when to use the switch statement. So I have VS Code open here, and notice that I have pasted in an example of an if-else statement. First, on line 3 here, I've assigned the value of 50 to the variable result. Then, on line 5, I'm checking if the result is greater than 40. If this returns the Boolean value of true, my code will console log the words, "You passed the test." After that, on line 7, I specify the else block, which will run when the if condition returns false instead of true. In that case, I use console.log to output "You did not pass the test." Okay, so now let's run this code. And, as expected, I get the output of "You passed the test." This happened because the statement 50 is greater than 40 in the if condition returned true, and its associated block of code was executed. Now, let me change the value of the result variable to, say, 30, and rerun the code. This time I was notified that I did not pass the test. This was because the condition 30 is greater than 40 was evaluated and returned false. The code was skipped inside the if block. Instead, the code inside the else block was run. My code works well because I'm checking a binary condition here, but what if there are more options? In that case, I'll need to cover all these possibilities. Let me switch tabs to demonstrate this using else-if statements. Okay, so notice that I have a variable named place, and it's assigned to a string with the value of first. Next, notice my code contains 4 conditional statements. The first is an if statement that checks if the value of the variable place equals the string value of first. If this is true, then a message of gold will output to the console. As there are 3 more conditions, the next one needs to use an else if block. This time, I'm checking if the value stored in the place variable equals the string value of second. Once again, if this is true, a message of silver will output to the console. Notice lines 9 and 10. This code is another else if block that checks for a value of third and outputs the message of bronze. And this process would keep repeating for as many conditions as needed. Finally, if no condition is met, I have a catch-all else statement at the end. This is crucial because if the conditional checks for the values first, second, or third are not satisfied, the else block will run and output the text "no medal." Okay, so this code looks good to me. Let me run it to test the output. Notice the word gold is outputted. While this method is correct, it can become a bit unmanageable when there are multiple conditions. For example, say you had to evaluate 10 conditions. Luckily, there is another statement at our disposal, and this is called the switch statement. Let me switch tabs again, and now notice the code. So here I have a switch example, but I want to examine these files side by side. So let me click on the tab of the switch statement file, and I'll drag it around until I find a good place for it. That will allow me to compare the code. Let's adjust this a little bit more and clear the output of the console. Okay, so you may notice that the syntax is significantly different by inspecting these 2 files. If I run the switch statement code here, I get the same result. The word gold is output, Also, if I change the value of place variable to say fourth, the default case will be run, and the text no middle will output to the console. The if-else example code acts precisely the same, so here when I update the variable place to fourth, the same thing happens. The words no middle are logged. Congratulations! You have now learned about conditional statements using the if and else. You've also learned how to streamline multiple conditions using the switch statement. If you would like to learn more about conditional statements and operators, there is a link to an additional reading at the end of this lesson.